All right, got a couple minutes left. This will be the last one for today. This is from Delia. And she tells a story about getting sick. She says she's 76-year-old, Pastor Steve, and that, this is the part I want to read. While unconscious, I felt transported to clouds and could see a friendly crowd of people coming towards me. It was comforting and pleasant, and then says a bunch of other stuff, but this is her question in context of that encounter. What is your understanding of the biblical view on near-death experiences? I can think of several in the Bible. Stephen and John come to mind.
In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul talks about exactly that type of situation. He says this, and he's talking about himself, but he does it in the third person. And it's something that was done in writings at the time for humility's sake. He says this, "It is doubtless not profitable for me to boast. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord." And he says, "I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago," and then he says this, "whether in the body I do not know, or whether out of the body I do not know, God knows, such a one was caught up to the third heaven. And I know such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, God knows, how he was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words, which is not lawful for a man to utter." And so Paul is talking about a vision that he had of heaven, and specifically he says of paradise in this passage. And he doesn't know if he was in the body or out of the body. There was a point in Paul's ministry where he was stoned in a city, and they dragged him outside the city, and they stoned him, and the disciples thought that Paul was dead. And he ended up getting up and dusting himself off and walking back into the city and preaching the gospel some more. In any case, this might have been at that event, or it might have been in a dream state or something like that. But Paul talks about the fact that he doesn't know if he was in his body or not. And so that would obviously be an out-of-body experience like that. Most times, though, when you're going through the Bible and it talks about visions, it equates visions in the Bible with dreams. And not that every dream is a vision, but visions are given in a dream state. And sometimes those are waking dreams in the sense of, God could give me a vision right now, and I'm kind of transported, God takes over my mind, basically. And I'm transported into kind of a dream state, and God speaks to me through that vision. Or that can happen in an actual dream state where I'm asleep. And you see both those happening, for example, with Daniel. And when you're looking at that type of situation, most likely what's happening is they're still in their body. And you have the same thing with John in the book of Revelation. He talks about the fact that he was in the Spirit on the day of the Lord. And there's a question as to whether he's talking about Sunday, which is called the Lord's Day. Actually, he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. Or whether he's talking about the day of the Lord kind of being transported into the tribulation period. But his body was in Patmos, is what he says there. And so there's a bunch of stuff going on with John in the book of Revelation where he's somewhat in the same state, it looks like, that Paul is in when he's talking about what happens in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And so that could be, that same type of situation. In either case, when you're talking about something that God gives to you, every time that God has given me a vision in a dream, and there's been a couple of different times that he's done that, it's been something that's absolutely real and something that was meant to teach me something specifically, and something bummed about waking up from. And so I had a dream one time that I was raptured and that I was in heaven with the Lord, and actually with a friend. I was talking to a friend during that vision or that dream. And then at the end of it, I woke up and I couldn't believe it. I woke up in my bed and I was like, oh man, it wasn't real. And it felt absolutely real. It was one of those things where it was like, I felt like I was really there. And, the whole thing was like that. And that's a vision. And so I had a vision of paradise. And I heard things that are not lawful to utter.
All right, Delia, there you go.